Okay, welcome. This is a tutorial on some of the basic operations of SPSS. So I'm just going to give you an overview of the software, and I'm going to show you how to create variables, enter data, and run a very simple frequency analysis, and then save all of the important files. So for this example, I'm going to use the data from the textbook. This appears on page 14 in table 2.1. And so this is basically, in this example from the textbook, this is the beer drinking data. So what you have here is what your data file should look like when you're all finished. You see that there's three variables: participant ID, beers consumed in a week, and brand of beer. So what you're looking at right now is the data editor in SPSS. This is where we create variables and where we enter data. The data editor consists of two different views. What we're looking at right now is the data view. And then you'll notice there's this button on the bottom to toggle into a different view, which is the variable view. So the data view is where we see the scores for our different participants or for our cases. So in SPSS, the rows are the cases and the columns are the variable. So in this particular data set, we have 15 different cases or 15 different participants, and we have three variables. So each participant has a value on each of those three variables. And this is where we see their scores. In the variable view, this is where we can enter the new variables and we can specify the properties of those variables. Okay, so let's start from scratch so you can get an idea of how to create all this. So I'm just going to open up a new data editor. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to toggle first to the variable view, and this is where I'm going to create those three variables. Okay, so when it comes to names, SPSS does have a couple rules for how you name your variables. Variables can't start with a number, they can't have any spaces. So the rules for naming variables are found on page 14 of the textbook. But if you pretty much just remember, don't start with a number and don't have any spaces. Also don't use some of the special characters like a parenthesis sign or an exclamation sign. You'll be fine. So what I'd like for you to do for this assignment is just make sure to stick to the naming conventions for the variables that I specify in the instructions. But otherwise, you can pretty much name your variables anything you want, so long as it makes sense and it's similar to what appears in the either in the chapter or the assignment instructions. So I'm just going to call this first variable participant. Do that again. There we go. Participant. I'm just going to put participant ID or part ID. Okay. So you'll notice that by default, some values come up. The only thing I'm going to change is all the way over to this, almost all the way over to the right hand. Here we've got three different choices for measures, which corresponds to level of measurement. We've got the choices scale, ordinal, or nominal. I'm going to choose nominal, which just means that the values of this variable are categories and the numbers don't have any magnitude or meaning. One other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to specify that there's 0 decimals for this variable. Okay, the next variable is number of beers per week. I'll just call that beers a week. Okay. Now there's a name of a variable, and then you can also add a label, which is a little bit, it would be longer or more descriptive. Okay, so I'll do that here. This is participant number. This is number of beers per week. And then our third variable is the brand of beer. I'll just call this beer brand. And then I'm gonna just label this brand of beer. Okay, you don't have, you could just put brand, you could have beer brand, brand of beer. It doesn't really matter what you put here as long as it's a descriptive label. Okay, let's go ahead and change the measures. So beers per week, that's gonna be a scale variable because the numbers have meaning, and the difference between 1 and 2 is the same as the difference between 3 and 4. Beer brand is a nominal variable because the type of brand is a nominal or categorical variable. The values are categories. Now we do have to do something special when we have a nominal variable. And so what we have to do is we have to create value labels. So you'll see that in this middle column that's called values. What we do is, I'll just do that one more time. You'll see that you get these 3 dots. Click on that box, and here's where we're going to enter value labels. So the value labels that you should enter appear on page 15 of the textbook. What we're going to do where it says value, that's where we're going to put a number. And then label is where we're actually going to write the word or the text. So according to the textbook, a value of 1 is bongo beer. And then once we have that, we'll add it. And then it appears in our list. Okay, number 2 is Swiller Light. And we're going to add that. Okay, so I could go all the way through 1 through 6, and I would follow that process of adding a value. I'll do one more. We put our number here, and then we put our text in the label box. This is lights out lager. Add. And then we click OK, and then we'll notice that those values appear. Okay, let's toggle back to the data view. Okay, you can do things that make your data editor look a little bit prettier, like you can space out your columns. This is all preference, really. What we see from the table is we have 15 participants, so entering the data is as simple as just entering the data. Okay, I'll just type it in. You can see how quick that is. You'll notice that when there's a missing value, SPSS just provides this dot. So that's saying that currently these participants have missing values on these 2 variables. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we're just going to enter the number of beers consumed per week. So I'm just really filling in, following the table that is table 2.1 that is provided on page 14. All right, please just be careful when you're entering your data and make sure that you're entering your data exactly as it appears in the assignment instructions or in a particular table. Okay. You'll notice that there's no decimal places for participant. There is decimal places for beers consumed a week. If we toggle back to the variable view, we'll see that's just because I specified 0 decimals for the first variable. If I want, I can just change this to 0 decimals for beers per week, and you'll see that that goes away. It doesn't make any difference. It's just a preference. It's whatever you want to do. Okay, and then finally, with beer brand, we've got a couple different options here. So what I'm going to do is when we toggle on this variable, that provides us a drop down, and then that way we can choose the value that we've already entered. Now I've just entered 3. There's 6 different brands of beer, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm just kind of doing this quick. Okay, so I highly recommend that you enter your value labels, and then you use the drop-down menu to select your data. Okay. What you can also do is if you just type the first couple letters, that will bring up the category that matches. So you want to put in your value labels before entering your data so that you make sure that you've got the appropriate value labels, and then you don't have any issues with like data entry errors by having misspelled words or things like that, okay? So that's the process for creating your variables and entering your data. What I'm gonna do is just go to my, so I'm gonna just get rid of that. And let's go to the one that I already created. One thing that I wanted to show you is there's this toggle up here. You'll see that there's like a letter A and a 1. So this toggles between your numerical values and then your category labels. Again, what you look at or what you see is just a matter of preference. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to save this data file. So to do that, I'm just going to go to File, Save As. All right, and then for Save As, just make sure to give it a descriptive name. So I've given this file a descriptive name. If there's specific instructions for the name that you should save your data file as in the instructions, make sure to do that. And then just make sure to pick a location on your computer where you'll be able to easily find your data files and the other files that have to do with SPSS. So that's where I've specified that location here, and then save it. All right. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to learn about something called a syntax file by performing a very simple operation. This is also going to be the first time that you see how to run an analysis in SPSS. So the first analysis that we're going to do is just to create a frequency table for beers consumed a week and brand of beer. So to do that, we're going to go to our Analyze command, and you'll be working with this drop-down window quite a bit. Under Analyze, you'll see that there's all types of different analyses that you can perform in SPSS. For this lab, I'm just going to have you run descriptive statistics and then a frequency analysis to create a frequency table. Okay, so that's found under Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, and Frequencies. Click on Frequencies. And then we've got a window where we've got the 3 variables that we entered. What you're going to do is you're going to select weekly beer consumption, or beers a week, and then use this blue arrow to move it over into this window. We're going to do that with brand of beer as well. And that's all you need to do for this particular analysis. Okay, you'll see that there's all of these options on the right. We'll get into those in subsequent tutorials, but for right now, all you have to do is select weekly beers consumed, brand of beer, and move those over using the blue arrow to this little box. You can move them back over, you can move them back and forth, okay? Don't select participant ID, you don't need it. Okay, you'll see that this box is checked to display frequency tables. That's the only thing that we're going to request from this analysis, is to display a frequency table, okay? So make sure that that's checked. Now, importantly, what I wanted to show you is this paste command. This paste command generates something called a syntax window. A syntax window is kind of what operates behind the scenes. SPSS has a graphical user interface, which means that we can basically click on these buttons and that'll run the commands for us. However, it's useful to save the computer programming or the syntax to be able to run our analyses. Okay, so that's what we're going to do here. We're going to create this syntax file, and that will run the analysis for us. Now, what I want you to do, and this is specified in the book on page 21, is we can add comments to our syntax. And this can be helpful so that when we basically understand what the syntax is doing for us. What you need to do is you should type type an asterisk, basically this star sign, at the beginning, and that will make sure that SPSS knows that you're just adding a comment and it's not a command that SPSS can execute. You'll notice that when you do that, you get grayed out, this gray text, and that the gray text is not something that SPSS recognizes as a command. Okay, so we're just going to write this analysis requests the frequencies for the beer data, period, and closing it off with that period, and then I'll add a space, is the other thing that's necessary so that SPSS just recognizes that this is a comment and it's not a command. So to add comments, make sure that you're preceding your comment with an asterisk and then you're closing it with a period. You'll know that you've done it correctly when that text is gray and then the subsequent text has color. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is I'm just highlighting our syntax, and then I'm going to go up to this gray button, which is like a run button or a play button. That is actually going to tell SPSS to run the command and perform the analysis. All right, so we're going to do that. Now what we just have up here is an output window. So this is the SPSS statistics viewer. I more commonly refer to it as the output viewer. This shows the output of the analysis that we just ran in the syntax window. Okay, so I'm going to maximize it. And we can see that what we've done is we've produced a frequency table for beers consumed per week, and we've produced a frequency table for the brands of beer that are consumed. The last thing that we're going to do is we're going to save both our output file as well as our syntax file. Okay, and we do that just using the same save command. So I'm going to save this as something descriptive. Okay, so this is, I'll just call it the chapter 2 beer data. I actually give you some specific instructions in the your first assignment. I tell you specifically what to save it as, so just make sure that you save it as something specific, and then make sure to specify where you're actually going to save that. Okay, we want to make sure to save it in the appropriate place. Okay, so I'll save that. Okay, and then once saved, I'm just going to close that window, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to save my syntax window as well. Same thing, file, save as. We can just call this the chapter 2 beer data syntax. I'm going to make sure to save it in my data labs folder, save that. And then we're done. That's all that you're required to do for this first assignment. And so this tutorial was just meant to give you a very basic overview of how to create variables, how to name variables, how to specify variable properties, how to enter data, how to run a very basic analysis, produce a syntax window, and then save your syntax file and your output file.